Okay, so we're going to read through Esther chapter 7. We just read through chapter 6 and saw that there was a big turning point. And now we're going to find out kind of how things go for Haman. He's been invited to the banquet. He had just got through parading Mordecai through town. And Mordecai goes back to business as usual. And Haman goes home just humiliated and probably exhausted because it was late at night when he went to approach the king about killing Mordecai, and then he was told to parade Mordecai through the town. And so that probably happened early morning. He's probably tired. He gets home humiliated as he's approached and taken to the banquet for Esther that she's invited him to. So the title of this chapter is Haman hanged instead of Mordecai. This is chapter 7 of Esther. So the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther. And on the second day, at the banquet of wine, the king again said to Esther, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Up to half the kingdom it shall be done." So obviously the king knows that Esther's true petition is not for him just to dine with her, but that she's got something else on her mind. And as this kind of chess match between Esther and Haman plays out, we see that Esther's really put herself in a good position. She fasted for 3 days, and so she had one banquet, I believe, to kind of recharge herself, and now she's at the second banquet right as Mordecai was trying to deal another crippling, or not Mordecai, Haman rather, was trying to deal a crippling blow to Mordecai. The whole situation reversed itself. And so we could see God's providence in that. Verse 3. Then Queen Esther answered and said, "If I found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given at my petition, and my people at my request. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could never compensate for the king's loss." Verse 5. So King Ahasuerus answered and said to Queen Esther, "Who is he and where is he who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing?" And Esther said, "The adversary and the enemy is this wicked Haman." So, we see kind of in Esther's humility there that she's saying, "Hey, I wouldn't have bothered you if it was just slavery, if we would have just been inconvenienced, but didn't cost our lives, if our whole lives would have been changed, but it didn't result in annihilation or death, wouldn't even have bothered you." But she says, even if that would have happened, wouldn't have been good for you, because, myself and my people were good for the king here. And we got verse 6, and Esther said, "The adversary and the enemy is this wicked Haman." So I think it's interesting too, because she uses terms adversary and enemy, and biblically adversary is a word that means adversary is Satan, and the enemy is another word that is referred to Satan, whatever Satan is or whoever Satan is. Those are terms that are referred to him, and she's using that term for Haman. So I think that's interesting, and we'll see kind of here why that kind of plays into some of the imagery that may be foreshadowing Christ. So Haman was terrified before the king and queen. Then the king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden. But Haman stood before Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. So I know, thinking about this, I wonder if it was going through the king's head that he gave Haman the stamp of approval to do what he wanted to with his signet ring. And a lot of times with human behavior, when we are at fault, we can be very angry with the people who have kind of led us in that direction. So I think this is what's happening with Haman. I think that the king, in my mind, in addition to the fact that he's realizing that this guy was gunning for his wife, even though Haman didn't know that at the time. Haman was seemingly unaware that Esther was Jewish and that she was related to Mordecai. And this was, Mordecai had prevented her from saying anything. And I think that was wise. And it's almost like Mordecai knew, like, hey, these things are important to hold back. How he knew that, it doesn't say. It just says that he told her not to reveal that. Even though Mordecai revealed that he was Jewish, he didn't want Esther to, and we can see that was important that he didn't, because Haman had no clue. So he was like blindsided by this. So he saw that the king was going to determine evil, and so he's kind of approaching Esther. Makes sense, pleading, please, don't, I messed up, obviously. So when the king returned from the palace garden to the palace of the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was. Then the king said, "Will he also assault the queen while I'm in the house?" The king's really mad here. He's looking at Haman, who is pleading for his life, even if it's in the back of the king's head that this guy's pleading for his life. He's disgusted with this guy. And so any movement in any direction, I believe the king's finding something. And so he's just openly accused Haman of sexually assaulting the queen because he's close to her. There's a reason the king had positioned eunuchs, men who were castrated, to care for his queen and concubines, because they were no sexual threat to the queen. But Haman wouldn't have been castrated. He wouldn't have been a eunuch. And here he is laying across the couch in his desperation to gain favor from the queen. But it does the opposite. He would have probably given himself more advantage by just staying away, staying quiet, not trying to approach. He kind of dug his hole. He could have probably expected to lay in it, but now the king has made this statement, and we'll see that as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Now Harbona, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, so one of the eunuchs is pointing out, look, the gallows, or that big stake that Haman made 50 cubits high, which would be about 75 feet, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, is standing at the house of Haman. Then the king said, without missing a beat, he says, hang him on it. Verse 10, so they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. And then the king's wrath subsided. So one thing that is important to notice here, we've got imagery for Haman, that he's the adversary, and he's evil. And we've got Mordecai here, who was meant to be hung on a stake. And so what we see here is what I believe is like a foreshadowing or a type of Christ. So Mordecai in this, as a character, is kind of a type of Christ. So what do we see at the cross? We see Christ be hung on a cross, die for our sins, and then 3 days is risen. So in other words, the cross didn't, the intent of the cross was to be done with Christ, but it didn't. It's positioned him, because of his obedience, to do that. He was able to take his life back, be able to have all authority in heaven and earth given to him. And in doing that, he was able to counteract Satan's plan against humanity. And I think this is what we're seeing in this story. And I think this is like a foreshadowing. This is something that that we look at this, and we look at that Haman, who had everything figured out. He had it down to a T, and he was even accelerating the plan. Unfortunately for him, you just can't get around like in a chess match with a grandmaster. You're just not going. If you're a lower level player, you're not gonna be able to pull one over. Even if everything's looking good, you got to wonder why. Because you're getting invited to banquets, and this is all these things for Haman were working toward counteracting the destruction that he was trying to do to the Jewish people. And so, though God isn't mentioned, it's very clear, I think, that he is working in this story, and that Haman is not able to counteract. Even his wife and his wise men, his friends, told him the same. Look, if Mordecai is of Jewish descent, and whom you begin to fall, forget about it. And so we also see that a stake, a wooden pole, similar to the imagery of the cross, is being used, and that the adversary is defeated by the very thing he thought he was going to win with. That is chapter 7. And so we've got a few, 8, 9, 10, we've got a few chapters left in Esther before we're done with the book. So next time we'll go through chapter 8.